oversight to add it, and everybody kind of thought we were.
You guys ready to go?
Maybe not doing the right thing. That's a bummer.
Good evening, everyone.
I understand because we don't need to.
Good evening, everyone. So tonight this is the intergovernmental meeting, and there might be some business we're supposed to take care of. Where's Judy? Like approval of the minutes. I wasn't at the last intergovernmental meeting, so either that or do we need a motion or something? I need a motion to accept the minutes. Motion and second to accept the minutes. All those in favor signify by aye. Opposed? We're good. Okay, so tonight, as part of the six-city intergovernmental meeting, we're lucky enough to have our candidates for the area here tonight in a candidate forum. And I'm going to start with introductions tonight. We have representatives from 13B, Heidi Everett, and Tim O'Driscoll, who's the other candidate, is not here yet. We expect him to arrive a little bit later. 14A is Eric Putnam and Tama Tice. 13A is Lisa Damath, sorry, thank you, and Jim Reed. And then for Senate, in a special election, is Joe Persky and Jeff Howe. So, sorry. So anyway, we're going to start with I'm just going to start with a real simple question. And knowing you're in St. Joe, who's your favorite mayor? No, okay, I'm just kidding. So if you'd all start, we're going to go, Heidi, for you start, and end up with Jeff. Just give us a little introduction about yourself. Tonight we have Bradley Peterson from Coalition of Greater Minnesota City. He's going to moderate. After you do introductions, he's going to come up here and ask questions, and we'll go through from there, okay? Do we need to give the rules of the road here?
I can do that one.
Okay, would you? Okay. How do you want to start?
Over like a minute, kind of, okay.
Just a very brief introduction.
Just a simple introduction.
I'm Heidi, I live in St. Wendell Township. I've been in this community since 1988. My husband Emil and I have 4 children ranging in ages from 9 to 24. We have a small hobby farm out past Pleasant Acres. Currently, I'm a professor of communications and journalism at Minnesota State University Moorhead. As a volunteer for the last 25 years, my efforts have focused on raising funding for schools, workforce development, and workers' rights. And I am delighted to be here, and thank you very much for hosting us.
Thanks, Heidi.
Good evening, I'm Tama Tice. My husband Greg and I have been in the area for 38 years. We did live in Rockville for 11, and then moved back into St. Cloud on the south side, just in time to run for office when Steve Gottwalt resigned, so that was quite an experience. Not only getting used to the south side, we always lived on the north side, but also coming back into town and not being in the country. But we have been business owners since 1985, 30 years as a remodeler, contractor, and now, I don't even know how many years, Greg's been doing home inspections. And we also own some rental property, but running for my 4th term.
Very good. Thanks, Tama. Eric?
My name's Eric, Eric Putnam. I'm a professor at St. John's and St. Ben's. I teach in the Communication Studies Department like Heidi does, but what I focus on specifically are the practices of citizenship. So I teach about how to inspire young college kids to go out and become good citizens and the skills that it takes to do that. So I teach debate, argument, history of social movements, that kind of stuff. My wife Lori and I lived there for 20 years. Lori is actually the principal at St. Joe, just down the street. So her favorite mayor is obvious.
Yeah.
And in fact, he probably sees her more often than I do.
Hold
So
on
how
a
is she
second.
doing anyway?
Yeah, she's doing well.
That's good, that's what I thought. I got into politics kind of not intentionally. I was never driven to get into electoral politics, but sometimes you think you can fix stuff, and so you step up and try to do it. And that's why I'm running for office right now. Thanks.
Thank you, Eric. Lisa?
My name is Lisa Damath. The easiest way to remember Damath is if you rhyme it with Joe Namath. Just
Yeah.
It kind of works. That's how I met my in-laws. But I am from Cold Spring, married to Nick. We have 4 kids, 2 sons-in-law and 3 grandkids. And we've been there for 20 years. I was actually born in Paynesville, which is part of District 13A. So it has been a pleasure to get back and to see residents in that area that I haven't seen for a number of years. I'm a small business owner. I own a commercial rental property with my husband. I do all of the property management that is right outside of Cold Spring in Wakefield Township. I am on the Rocori School Board. I've been on for 11 years, winning my first election as a write-in. Went through and decided to run for 2 additional terms, and I had decided a year ago not to seek re-election. I was given a phone call by my current representative, Jeff Howe, on Memorial Day, and he said, "Hey, Lisa, have you ever thought of running for House of Representatives? I said, that's never crossed my mind. Then I realized that I was actually speaking to him and needed to think. Took a couple of days to think about it, talked with my family, decided that with my experience on the school board, being able to listen to a community and make decisions based on that, being a business owner, being from central Minnesota, knowing the values that that encompasses, that I could probably do a good job. I don't think of myself as a politician, but as a possible representative. And that is my story.
Thanks, Lisa. Jim?
My name is Jim Reed. I live in Avon, city of lakes, loons, and living, with the Lake Wobegon Trail as well. I've taught at the College of St. Benedict and St. John's University since 1988. So I first lived in St. Joseph until 1995 when we bought our house in Avon. My wife, Pia, manages the Minnesota Street Market, which took over what was Loso's supermarket and then reopened it as a local organic and art co-op. And so we have a stake and a presence both in St. Joseph and in Avon. I decided to run because I was troubled by how deeply and toxically divided our politics have become. You've noticed this if you go to the mailbox this time of the election season, you open the mailbox and you get this spray of pig manure in your face. It's not pleasant. It's a sign of how divisive our politics has become, and it's not really the candidates that are doing this. This is outside money, people who want to use our district as pawns for whatever their political game is, and so I was troubled by that. My work as a writer, as a political theorist, looks at the period leading up to the Civil War. I'm working on a book on Abraham Lincoln, and our politics today are more divided than at any time since then, which didn't end well. So I was concerned, and I made a commitment that I was going to go and talk to as many people as possible in face-to-face conversations, try to bridge some of these political divides. Sometimes we'll agree, sometimes we won't agree, but at least I want us to come away from those conversations seeing one another as fellow citizens rather than foreigners or enemies. And in most cases, in 49 cases out of 50 in a doorstep conversation, people are civil and recognize what our democracy is supposed to be. So that's why I did this and why I still believe in this process, and thank you for coming today.
Thanks, Jim. Joe?
Yes, first of all, I want to thank you for being here. And just taking a look out at the audience, I want to thank the mayors for being here, council members, and the city administrators. You know, having been mayor in Sartell, this is really a great opportunity for us to get together and share our common ideas and work together city by city and be able to feel some sense of community as one local area. So I really appreciate you folks being here, and I hope you continue to have these meetings. Well, I'm county commissioner. I was also the mayor of Sartell, also on the council for 6 years as well. I've been a teacher for 37 years. 26 of those years were in Sartell. For 39 years, I've been married to an amazing woman, Jan, and we've got 3 daughters and 4 grandchildren, including 3 newly born triplets. I never planned to be running for the state legislature, but through some crazy political chain of events, here I am. But I'll tell you what, as the county commissioner, I was able to focus on the people and focus on the issues and not the political parties, and that's one thing I've really been able to enjoy. Because like so many Minnesotans, I'm frustrated. I'm frustrated with the legislature and the partisan divide. They seem to put the jerseys on like Vikings and Packers and come after each other. And at the end of this past session, there was a 990-page omnibus bill. And the governor ends up vetoing that. Well, we get nothing out of that. Well, you folks that are out here as mayors and council people, you wouldn't do that. And I wouldn't do that as a commissioner. We need to come together. We need to work together. We have many issues that are facing us in Minnesota today. And we can only get those things resolved if we work together. And I'm willing to come together, Democrats and Republicans, and do what's best for the people of Minnesota. You know, the Constitution says we the people, not we the party. And we need to be focusing on what's best for us as Minnesotans. Also, I'm trying to run a positive campaign. Jim mentioned the stuff that's flying around in the mailboxes, and that's very frustrating. So I consider that Jeff and I, we've been friends in the past, and I'm going to not say anything bad about him. I'm going to continue to run a positive campaign, and I'm running for Joe Persky and not against Jeff.
Thanks, Joe. Jeff?
Well, thank you. Name is Jeff Howe. I'm your current state representative for District 13A, and I've served there for 6 years. Before that, I was a councilman in Rockville. And prior to that, last year I just retired out of the Guard after 38 years in the military. And I also served for 27 years. Hey, look at that, something works. I was thinking I had to use my command voice here pretty soon, but.
We're still tweaking the system.
So I served for 27 years as a firefighter for starting out in St. Cloud, and then I served in Waite Park for 10 years, and during that stretch of time, I also served 19 years for the city of Rockville as a firefighter. So I understand small town finances, and I understand, and most of my life has been serving with one city or another, so I understand small town politics, I understand small town finances, and how hard it is to get everything done and repair your roads and provide services to everyone. So my wife and I have lived in Rockville for the last, since '92, and before that we lived in Sauk Rapids is where we built our first house. So 240 9th and a half Street. Great house. I was just there. They haven't changed the colors. Great place. And we raised 4 children. They're all 4 grown and out of the house and doing great things. So looking forward to continuing to represent the citizens of this district.
Thanks, Jeff. Bradley Peters will be our moderator tonight going through the questions. And just so you all know, we are being broadcast live tonight. So don't do anything silly.
Good evening. My name is Bradley Peterson. I'm an attorney and lobbyist with the firm of Flaherty and Hood in St. Paul, and the lead lobbyist for the Coalition of Greater Minnesota Cities. 97 cities outside of the 7-county metro area working on issues related to local government aid and property taxes, economic development, transportation, environmental regulatory issues, land use, those types of things, specifically from a Greater Minnesota focus. So I'm very pleased to be here. I want to thank the candidates for taking their time to be here. I think it's very important to engage with your local elected officials. And, those of you who want to represent the folks in this room at the legislature, you need to know that at the legislature, what they do here in terms of the intergovernmental cooperation is a model that gets looked to at the rest of the state. And the state wants cities to work together. I know sometimes it's not always easy, and you all kind of have your family feuds from time to time, but it really is a model for how to get good things done. So you're lucky that you're going to have them standing behind you if you are elected. A couple of ground rules for the evening. We've got a series of questions scheduled for about an hour and a half or so here. Shauna Johnson will be our timer. We'll ask you to limit your answers to about 45 seconds. She'll flash when there are 15 seconds left, and the pink means stop. So if at that point you can wrap up your answer, I don't want to cut anybody off. You're all well-practiced politicians by this time in the cycle, so you should be able to keep your answers succinct. And then we'll leave a little bit of time for some audience questions. And then a time at the end for each of you to give kind of a 1-minute summary closing pitch. With that, I will do my best to rotate kind of through who starts with each of the answering each of the questions. And so I'll do my best to make that rotation work. If I get off a little bit, don't be too critical. And so since Heidi had the first start when doing the introductions, we'll start with Tama. And so for all of you, we'll get the same question. We're going to start with an easy one, all right? As you've been campaigning and talking with constituents in your respective districts, what do you think the most important issue facing central Minnesota communities is? What are you hearing at the doors? Tama?
Thank you. Healthcare. Healthcare is number one, and it's healthcare in several different ways. It's not only the care itself, but also the insurance. So I'm hoping that next year we can keep on the track of basically putting Minnesota back on top of insurance, health insurance, and continue with that road. but also looking at some of the ways that we can get better mental health access, especially. I'm hearing that quite a bit as well.
All right, Eric.
Do we need to use the microphone? The question was, what are we actually hearing? I mean, there's things that I think are important that I would like to address, but in terms of an honest reflection of the things that are said to me when I knock the door, the first thing that comes up more often than not is education. People are concerned about how many kids are in the public schools, how full the classrooms are, how stressed teachers are, how difficult it is to find good teachers. And I think that a lot of people in our communities understand that the problems that we have with workforce development, the problems that we have interculturally sometimes, because sometimes when people say, let's be honest, when people say education, sometimes they mean immigration. When those issues come up, we talk about education as a way of dealing with all of some of our other concerns. I think it's a kind of a hub that deals with a lot of these other concerns. And it's the first thing that most people tell me when I come to the door.
All right, Lisa.
It was a surprise to me when I first got to the doors at the very beginning of the summer was that healthcare was the greatest issue, the cost of it, and then the cost of insurance. There's a benefit to having our kids that are 26 or under being able to be on our policies, and a lot of parents were very grateful for that, but how are they going to afford it? What kind of coverage are they getting? That was by far I would say, probably every 2 to 3 doors is what I'm hearing. The other thing right now, this last week as we're winding down, is the negativity in politics overall. And I think we've worked together long enough that we have all showed each other great respect, and that's something I'm really grateful for.
Healthcare comes up more than anything else. Second thing, education, as Eric was talking about. And third, why can't they stop fighting and work together? And especially, I think, for the cities, they're the ones that get caught up in these. They're the collateral damage in these party battles. Last time we saw a government shutdown, cities were really with construction projects held up, with licenses and other kinds of things held up. So I'd say those 3 things: healthcare is very much on every people's minds, education is on their minds, and people want a less partisan process.
Joe.
I'll tell you what, I've seen and talked to many, many doors. I've been in just about every house at Paynesville, Cold Spring, Richmond, Rockville, Holdingford, Kimball, St. Stephen, Avon, St. Joe, 15 days in Sauk Rapids and a dozen days in Sartell, and I'm going to try to knock them out yet. But number one issue seems to be healthcare. People are very, very concerned about their frustration, their anger, their fear about the high deductibles, high copays. And I'll tell you what, we need to find something that actually works for the people, something that's accessible and affordable. For those that are at the upper end of the income, to them it's not a problem, but for those at the very end and those on a fixed income. Also the bipartisanship, the bickering, the fighting, the arguing, and again, just the stuff that comes into the flyers that come into the mailboxes. People are very upset and frustrated seeing all that type of smearing campaigns.
All right, Jeff.
Well, thank you. Healthcare is the biggest thing you hear out there, and the cost of insurance, and a lot of folks are paying through the nose. They're paying somewhere around $1,500 a month in a premium, and then they've got another $6,000 a piece on their deductible. Well, that's not affordable for many folks. A lot of them are paying out $30,000 out of their pocket before the insurance companies pay nickel one. That's not insurance. That's not taking care of folks. And keep in mind who wrecked this. We had the premier insurance program in the country. Everyone came to Minnesota and looked. Hillary spent a ton of time looking at Minnesota as the model for the country. And it was just 4 years ago when they put the ACA, the MNsure, in effect in Minnesota, that desecrated our insurance industry in this state.
All right, and Heidi.
Well, I have the ditto. Healthcare and divisive politics are the 2 things that I hear most about when I'm out door knocking. I am an advocate for single-payer healthcare. I think that is good for business, good for families, and good for our communities. I'm certainly, as Jeff mentioned, I've met those folks who are paying $18,000 a year, and they have $6,000 deductibles before any insurance kicks in. That's not insurance, that's a scam. And if my opponent were here, he would tell you that he's very proud of the legislation that was passed to cap double-digit growth on health insurance premiums. But if you're paying for a scam you're still paying for a scam even if the premium is capped. When we get to civility, I'm running for civility in action because only through civility will we be able to tackle these huge issues like healthcare and come up with a workable solution.
All right. Moving on to our next question. One of the first tasks that the next legislature will have to tackle is crafting this next state budget. Frankly, I think it's kind of unfair that one of the first things you have to do as a new legislator, a new governor, is all of a sudden put your mind to a $40 billion budget, but that's our system. And so that's going to be the first task. So, and I'm an optimist, so I'm going to assume a modest budget surplus. With all of that in mind, what do you think should be the priorities for the next state budget in terms of spending and taxes? And I think we're starting with Eric.
I know I was the only one who said that education was a priority at the doors, but honestly, that's what people tell me. And for me, I think that that's a really important priority for budgeting in general. Of course, it always is an important priority. But we also have other concerns, especially when it comes to transportation, infrastructure, and care. Our friends in St. Augusta need broadband. That's a very basic, very simple thing that needs to happen. And that, to me, that's a dimension of infrastructure, because it's one of the things that brings communities together and enables them to grow. That's the essence of infrastructure. Transportation, roads, those are the things that do the same thing. We have 500 fewer people at MnDOT filling potholes than we did 7 years ago. And we know that. We can feel it every time we drive across a pothole. These are things that we need to fix, that are easy to fix and have to be done. And I also would like an intervention in care. We have too many people with too many things that need to be done at DHS, and we don't have enough people to take care of those forms and that information. So that's something else that needs to be a priority.
All right, Lisa.
The first thing that I would like to take a look at in the budget is the transportation, fixing our roads and our bridges. I agree with some of what Eric has said. Fixing our roads and bridges is definitely a high cost and a difficulty for all of our townships, all of our cities. It affects every single person in Minnesota as we try to get to and from where we need to be, whether it's work, to school, whatever the case is. It does affect all of us. Hopefully we'll have that little bit of surplus, but I'd like to see that go into roads and bridges.
All right, Jim.
The greatest problem we face right now is that both education and the transportation infrastructure have been chronically underfunded. We have to find some way that addresses both of those, that does not do one at the expense of the other. Both are essential to our economic prosperity. Both face long-term chronic underfunding that's not going to be eliminated by 1 year's budget surplus. So we're going to need to look at that, and that, to me, is going to be both my short-term immediate priority and my long-term priority if elected.
Yeah, we do have a number of issues, and it's nice that we're blessed with a budget surplus at this time, but that doesn't mean we're just going to open up the checkbook and start writing checks. Obviously, it's a nice time that we can maybe do some catch-up on the per pupil so that some of these school districts that are kind of in dire straits maybe can do a little better than they've been able to do. Also look in some equity funding for the more of the outstate schools. But infrastructure remains a priority, I think, as all of us are going to talk about across the board. But as I've been across the district, and in particular across the county, there are many townships that are struggling with deficit bridges and culverts, and those culverts need to have some improvements. The equipment is changed greatly. We've got large fertilizer trucks, beet trucks, corn trucks, and they can't just hold the capacity from what they've had in the past. And so when you're going to have to be addressing those issues, whether the federal government steps in or state government in, we've got to address those things.
Jeff.
Well,
state
thank
budget.
you. As you know, transportation is one of those things that's near and dear to my heart that I've worked very hard on the last 6 years, and we're going to continue to work that because I think it's important because, as they said, that's where all our goods and services come from. But I also believe that we need to spend some money on mental health because way too much of our budget gets wasted with people going, and they're in a vicious circle between detox and mental health hold. And I think the city of St. Cloud, they spent not the city of St. Cloud, but they spent $3.3 million was wasted from our medical assistants on just shuffling people where they didn't get any more service. Broadband is a place that we need to spend money. I'm probably the poster child in the legislature for not having broadband, but that can help us with telecommuting to reduce the transportation wear. It can provide telemedicine. and it'll help us with our education system.
All right, Heidi, state budget.
So I caused a collective gasp at the Education Forum when I said I'd like to see the per pupil formula increased by 10%, which would get us back to where it was in 2003. Let me say that I choose to be aspirational, like salary negotiation or selling a house, because you are going to be negotiated down. So I stand by my 10%. I would also like to see a comprehensive transportation bill that goes beyond just a single item like a gas tax. We need to put all options on the table so that we are not continually digging up the mason jars under the porch to find money to pay for filling potholes and fixing our bridges.
Tam?
I tend to really stick by what constitutionally we're required to do, and that's transportation, public safety, and education. When we talk transportation, again, it's one of our constitutional duties. It's very frustrating to me that we constantly have to hear about coming up with new funding. It's like we shouldn't have to. It should be there. And people really kind of have a little gasp moment when you say, I think it should come from the general fund. It should come because that's what we need to do. That's how it gets people traveling. We need to make that priority. Public safety, as Jeff said, there's so many things that we could do with public safety. Plus, we've been hearing about more folks being hurt in correctional facilities. We need to really look at what we're doing. And then education. We've put more money on the formula than has been for quite a while, but there's still a lot of work to do, and I think we really need to look at are all the mandates, are all the paperwork, is that all really needed, and how can we eliminate some of that?
All right. Diving in a little bit more specifically to some of the issues that some of you have raised already, transportation is the topic of our next question. Transportation funding has been a controversial issue over the last several years at the legislature. There's been a lot of back and forth about the best way to fund our transportation system. Nearly everyone acknowledges that there are significant funding needs.
Not a good sign.
But there is no consensus in,
It's not a good sign.
Did offend?
no consensus
You all know who we are now, right? We can just let him go.
on how to raise the new revenue. Some contend that new revenue, such as a gas tax or adjusting tab fees, is the way to go. Others talk about reprioritizing current state funding, such as the general fund. Last year, there was a discussion of a constitutional amendment to allocate a portion of the revenue from the sales tax on collections attributable to auto parts. So there's lots of ideas out there. So specifically, the question to you, and again, we're starting with Lisa, is how would you fund the transportation needs that we have?
Thank you. Using the gas tax to fund our current needs definitely is a priority. I'm going to go back to what was stated in the question about a constitutional amendment that would possibly use the taxes from the sales of auto parts to be dedicated. Right now, that is going into the general fund, but our gas tax, our license fee, different areas a number of years ago had already been there and were transferred over. I think that is one way that it would affect all Minnesotans, no matter if you're driving new or old. We would all be able to be taxed, and it would go toward that transportation.
Yeah, when you initially wave that pink thing, we think it's time.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Oh,
But you hold it up to the back, and then you go, just
okay.
now. Okay. so
All
we're
right.
letting-
You're doing great. You're doing awesome.
We get it.
Okay.
Jim, transportation, how are we going to fund it?
We do have to find new transportation revenues. The main cause of the underfunding of transportation is the plummeting of gas tax revenues. That's where the major change in the budget situation has come from. So I am willing to consider many options, a modest increase in the gas tax. I'm willing to consider dedicating auto parts, auto repair, many of the kinds of things that Representative Howe and others have suggested. But for me, these need to be new revenues, because otherwise it will come at the expense of education. And that's, to me, part of this difficult balancing act that I talked about before, that if we take and transfer those things without adding any new revenues, it will come at the expense of education, it will come at the expense of long-term care. I'm not willing to do those. I'm looking for new revenues to fund transportation.
Yeah, as I said earlier, we are blessed with a good economy and the surplus, and so the general fund is a viable means to get those transportation things funded. We talked about a gas tax at various forums. I think everybody's in agreement. I don't know necessarily about raising that gas tax, but it's not going to go away. It's one of the tools in the toolbox, but not the only tool. As we've heard about electric cars, high mileage cars, then they don't seem to be paying perhaps what we consider their fair share. So maybe we can find some equitable way to tag something on so that when they're using the roads, they're paying more of a fair share, for their use on the roads. But it's a discussion that we obviously need to have because, again, transportation remains one of our priorities, and we can look again back perhaps at the general fund is getting those dollars out of there while times are good.
Jeff?
Well, as the guy that came up with the idea to take the sales tax on automotive parts and take that out of the general fund and put that to roads and bridges, you can tell I support that. I think it's a common sense move. It's a common sense shift. The other thing is I'm not totally opposed to a gas tax, but the problem with the gas tax, it's tough to raise taxes when you already have a budget. We're looking at possibly $1 billion budget next year. It's pretty tough to raise taxes when you're looking at that kind of a surplus. I mean, I should say a surplus in the budget, not. And then I do agree that we need to increase the fees on hybrid and electric cars. And I know New Flyer now is going to have electric buses. So with those types of big vehicles, semi-trucks, everything else is going to come electric too. So we need to up the fees on those because they'll be doing the same damage as the regular trucks.
All right, Tim O'Driscoll has joined us.
The newcomer.
And you haven't missed the LGA question yet.
Oh,
so,
good.
I know you were concerned about that. But the question at hand is, what is the best way to fund our transportation system? And you've got 45 seconds, and Shauna is doing the timing.
Great. We have to fund this with a multi-pronged approach. Number one is we are one of the only states in the country that does not have a general fund appropriation on the state's $40+ billion budget for transportation. We have repairs on there, but we don't have a permanent line item for transportation. Number two, I agree with some of the comments that have been made here that any vehicle that hits the road should pay for the road because we've got a lot of alternative fuels on there. We've got a lot of people who are falling through the cracks with the operations of those vehicles. What else can we do? We can use bonding money. We can use as the state budget grows, we can continue to dedicate more as our economy grows to transportation-related issues, among other things.
All right, Heidi, transportation.
I support what has been said here so far. I would like to add all options should be on the table. As I said earlier, we should consider toll roads, congestion taxes, gravel roads if need be. I live on a gravel road. I love it. It's kind of quaint. And certainly looking at other innovations where we incentivize businesses to come up with alternative road surfaces that can actually withstand our extreme temperature changes. I know Cargill has been researching a different road material that is more expensive at the initial outlay, but it's performing in terms of its long-term stability and sustainability. So that should be part of the equation as well. But all options should be on the table for this, and it should be comprehensive and sustainable.
Tamas.
I stated before, I think we should really look at having transportation as part of the general fund because it is one of our constitutional duties. And we have been lacking in it, and we're not getting the money in there to take care of the roads for everyone. But I would also think that we need to look at the agencies as well, and how can we streamline it? How can we make that more efficient? How can we do roads at a better cost? And so those are some of the things I'd like to see us look into as well. What are some of the ways we can be a little bit more innovative in making sure that we keep the costs down? I've heard that from folks that are basically coming to talk to us about how we keep the price down. But also, I think I'm just really excited that Commissioner Skilly at the groundbreaking for the third lane from Monticello to Albertville, St. Michael to Albertville, and that he actually said that he would look into keeping the third lane that they're going to build from Monticello to Clearwater. I think that just makes sense.
All right, Eric.
I agree with most of what's been said already. I'm hesitant to endorse a constitutional amendment to force funds to go in a particular direction. I don't think you mess with constitutions, although I understand the motivation for that decision, the kind of skepticism about politicians actually being able to negotiate appropriate funding for transportation makes sense to me, but not to the point where we would then undermine the Constitution or change the Constitution in any way. I think that we got to look at just about everything, as everyone else has suggested. But I also like the idea of incentivizing lesser use, finding ways to make sure that we don't use the roads quite as much as we do now. Like public transportation needs to be part of any conversation about transportation funding, like the North Star, things like that. Reducing some of the wear on some of our major arteries, I think, is an important idea. But I'd also would be open to a modest increase in the sales tax and tab fees. Just a 1 cent tax increase per gallon is $35 million a year. I don't think many of us would notice that very much, but we do notice the potholes.
All right. Our next question, we'll start with Jim Reed, and is about local government aid. Local government aid continues to be an important program for restraining property taxes and providing services to residents and businesses at a reasonable cost. The LGA appropriation to cities across the state is still $30.5 million less than it was in 2002, and even further behind if you factor in inflation and population growth since that time. So the question for you, Jim, is do you support LGA in its current form, and do you support an increase in LGA to get back to the 2002 level?
I'm clearly a candidate that needs no introduction here. So I was reading today about the history of LGA and how its purpose was to avoid the dependence on property taxes and how burdensome that was. So I do support the concept and the project of local government aid. I do think it needs to be brought up from what it was from the date that you mentioned. I guess I would say with local government aid, since we're still going to be facing tight budget times, I would prioritize that to some of the invisible problems like replacing water infrastructure, which is an enormous challenge for small cities in Minnesota. So maybe we'll have a chance to continue that in another answer.
Joe?
Yes, LGA is maybe that little miracle that keeps many of the small towns in rural Minnesota alive. And without that, they would collapse their roads, their infrastructure, even buying a fire truck. As this group sitting here before us, we've talked about LGA and the importance of LGA, and also seeing if we can somehow tweak the formula. But with the present dollars, there oftentimes are winners and losers, and oftentimes that pins us against each other. If any new dollars come in, we need to perhaps look at those communities that are getting shorted on it. I know, for example, Way Park is one that's been shorted for years, and they actually get nothing. And so is there some way that we can maybe help those folks out that they get something out of that? But also the main thing, too, is that we don't want to tax people out of their homes. If we get rid of LGA, many of these small towns, they are going to have to rely on property tax, and that's going to put those folks in a bind. Jeff?
I could give you real short answers like yes and yes, but I don't think that's what you're looking for. But, I think that we all know that the formula helps some folks and it just devastates others, and it's not a fair and equal balanced approach on everything. So we need to, but nobody wants to touch the LGA formula either. That's, they just tweaked it a little bit not too many years ago, and everybody's, it's a nightmare to try and tweak. So the short answer, I think, is it's a very important thing that we need to fund, and if we can increase that, we should.
All right, Tim?
As a mayor and city council member, I know the importance of local government aid, and as Representative Howe pointed out, and Commissioner Persky, there are communities in our current area that are not getting LGA, and they're for various reasons. The city of Sartell has various reasons why the city of Sauk Rapids is getting more comparable size, different kinds of things. The formula needs to be worked on and fixed. One of the other things that I think we can do that isn't necessarily a direct which I do support, by the way, increasing LGA. What we can also do is, Mr. Reed suggested, we also have PFA money where we can continue to fund those infrastructure areas where communities can apply for and receive grants as well to be able to do some of the infrastructure, which is another secondary way for people to get money without actually having to have the direct LGA. It's another tool. It's not the solve-all, be-all, but it is another way that we can assist.
All right, Heidi.
I would like to see LGA restored to 2002 levels and then keep on pace with inflation, but I also think it needs to be part of a much larger conversation about incentivizing workforce development and business growth in small communities. You know, we have a fabulous success story up in Thief River Falls called DigiKey. They're a, $2 billion company with 4,000 employees. They're a homegrown company, so they chose to stay in Thief River Falls. Do we have those type of success stories in our region where we can help people grow and expand and have the workforce development that will attract families to the area? And then I'm sure that will lead to other questions you have about broadband and daycare. But yeah, we can't let our small towns die on the vine. They are precious gems in Minnesota.
Tama, LGA.
Thanks. Like Jeff, I want to say yes and yes. But the real thing is, every year I kind of bug them because some of you mayors have told me that it is an issue for the communities. And this last year, when we were talking about the amphitheater, at first it was kind of like, oh, big deal. But I said, no, you guys, you don't get it. This is trying to fund an area that doesn't get funded as well as it should. So if communities have to think of different ways to raise the revenue in order to have their police force the way they need to have it, then we also need to be responsible in looking at what can we do to help folks out so that you don't have to build an amphitheater in order to be able to add to your police force.
Eric?
Yeah, I mean, the simple answer is, of course, some improvement in.
You forgot to cover that in the rules.
That's why we took away his name tag.
Now I'm glad I didn't have
I'm curious who earned such a jazzy phone ring, for example. That's a curious way to phone a friend. He doesn't have another question right now yet. He's still trying to get help. Yeah, so, you know, I do think that we definitely need a movement in that direction. You know, my first exposure to LG, I'm new to politics, so I still have a fair amount to learn about this, but was talking with Dave Benchard 2 years ago about how he wanted to start a soccer club, but he couldn't because he could barely even afford cops because Waite Park was so just in an awful position relative to LGA. And so what I did with him is I worked getting some interns from St. John's, St. Ben's, and my connections through CMYSA to build a soccer program for him out there. But he shouldn't have had to do that. Police departments should be able to not only have cops, but also to have recreational programs for kids. So yes, it's a problem for the rural areas, but it's also a problem for places like Waite Park.
All right, and Lisa.
And I would support increasing the local government aid funding. I don't know if I would support it going all the way back to what it was in 2002, but taking a look at that, bringing some improvement to that area, and then also the funding formula that's being used to equalize that and make that a little bit more fair across the board, not put so much burden on our local taxpayers.
All right.
So now that I fixed my phone, can I get my nameplate back?
All right. Our next question is also property tax related, and it's one that comes up from time to time at the legislature, and I know is certainly one that is on the minds of your local leaders here. And that is, from time to time, the legislature will put limits on the size of their levy that a city can increase and propose for their property tax levy. Do you support these kind of levy limits? Restricting how much a city can raise in their property taxes, or do you think that cities should just be able to go? And we'll start with Joe.
Actually, the all cities that we meeting that we've had in the past, as I was a member of that, being mayor and also on the council, you know, we never supported the levy limits. In that we felt that you know, the city should be able to generate the dollars that they need. Of course, that has to be done within reason. And I would think that, you know, those folks that are sitting on the council, the mayors and the city administrators, would be very prudent about that. You don't want to tax people out of your city. So, you know, when you get into dire straits, of course, you maybe have to make some adjustments and maybe have a little higher levies than you would have to otherwise have. So, no, I don't support levy limits.
All right, Jeff, levy limits?
No, I don't support levy limits either. I think that you're duly elected local officials, and you should be able to raise your levies as much as you see that you think you need, because the voters, if they decide that that's not prudent, they're going to unelect you. They'll put somebody else in there. But if there are I know there's proposals out there to tie LGA and levy limits together. If you want to take the LGA, then you're going to accept this levy limit. I'm not necessarily a proponent of that, but there's discussion out there like that. I actually like the idea that you guys are elected, you do what you need to do.
All right. Tim, levy limits.
I've never supported them when I was on city council as mayor. I've never supported them in the legislature. As a matter of fact, I was successful in a few times of getting that language removed from tax bills so that locals could continue to make those decisions. I believe that in this area, represented by people who are here from the various communities, each one of us wants to have our own identity and has our own priorities as we visit with our community. And if that's something that the community sees as a priority, and I concur with Jeff that if it's not something the city wants or the community wants, they will let you and I know at the ballot box as to whether or not we're moving in the right direction by how we spend the money, or if we increase increase the tax levy at the local level, or how we proceed with that. I'm very much in favor of continuing to let the locals have control on that.
All right. Heidi.
So that's a perfect transition to me, because I'm also okay with letting local governments have control of that. But I say that knowing that it's kind of a catch-22, because I do believe that the local elected officials have their fingers on the pulse of what is working and not working in their communities. So to that end, as much as I support letting local governments have control over their levy limits, I also think that they should be able to set their minimum wage. And I know that that's not necessarily a popular venture among various mayors that I've talked to. So it, with great power comes great responsibility. With great trust comes great responsibility. But I do believe our elected officials know what is right for their local community. And if it doesn't fare well, they'll be voted in the next election.
Tama.
I believe that the cities do need to have local control on those things. Again, they know the community. If the folks support it, they'll know soon enough whether or not they do. So I'm all for, communities doing what they feel is the right thing to do.
Eric?
Heidi took my answer. But I'm against any imposition of external authority that would in any way undermine municipal authority, really in virtually any context. We have responsibilities that are particular to the level of government, municipal, county, state. City governments, local governments are most in touch with their populations, and I think that that's the way it ought to be. They should be able to make decisions about things like minimum wage and about levies, and any effort to preempt that authority is inappropriate. But I'm going to take a positive spin to it. So it's not just that you're going to be voted out. It could be that you get voted back in for doing awesome things.
All right, Lisa.
I do not support limiting the size of our local levies. I believe that the local authority, you do know what is going on in your cities, both from mayors and city council. You know what is going to be best, and because of my work on the school board, I understand the importance of knowing the pulse and the heartbeat of your area and making those best decisions. I would support that at a city level also.
All right, and Jim.
So I'm going to agree with what has been said so far, with one caveat that yes, cities should be able to experiment. They should be able to do policies of their own. They should be able to innovate. For all those things, they need to have the authority to do local levies. But what I don't want happening is that for that to be then used as an excuse for the state to reduce its funding. That what you see with school districts is because some very wealthy school districts like in the inner ring suburbs can raise a lot of money, that has then led to less state funding going in. So if we're going to do this, and I support the idea, we have to make sure that the state is guaranteeing to every one of those cities that essential services will be there and will not depend on these occasional local levies.
All right. So pretty broad agreement that when it comes to their levies, cities should have pretty broad authority. But many of you touched on actually my next question, which goes to the preemption of other types of ordinances. And that has been a discussion over the last couple of years at the legislature, and obviously a topic of interest to folks who are running cities and passing ordinances. And so, as I said, over the last couple of years, there have been numerous bills at the legislature that would preempt local authority from passing regulations on various issues, ranging from local minimum wage and paid time off ordinances to local communities banning the use of plastic bags. Those are just two examples. There are certainly others. What is your philosophy on the legislature passing these types of laws to preempt local ordinances. Where should the line be drawn as to what the state should regulate and what should be left to local governments? And we're starting with Jeff Howe.
Well, I do believe that there are some issues when you start dealing with things that will affect commerce. And you start dealing with minimum wage, you start dealing with paid time off, and even the plastic bag issue. And I'll give you, for instance, on the plastic bag, if you know, the farmers right now are struggling finding a recycler for their silage bags and their bale bags because the recycler doesn't want to take it anymore. Well, the issue, we have a local company, I won't go very far with that, but we have a local company that would love to recycle those things. They talked to me 2 years ago. Their issue is they want a continued supply of grocery bags and those farm bags. Otherwise, it doesn't pay for them to spend millions of dollars for the machine to do it. So if we start regulating grocery bags at every city level, we're going to cut down the availability of a recycled product, and and that's an additional commerce and economy that we need in the rural area out here. So the second and third order effects of some of those types of decisions, people don't realize.
All right, Tim.
I've always firmly believed that the state would be the entity that would set the minimum wage in the state of Minnesota. There are some real issues if you happen to be a business that's located in an area where you have multiple communities that you do business in, and each one of those communities has a different set of rules for you to follow. That's really anti-competitive if you're a small and upcoming business, because you're spending a lot more of your time doing bookkeeping and regulatory bureaucratic type things. I have used in the past, and I will use this example again. Speedy Delivery is a company that does business in lots of different communities. If you're Speedy Delivery and you have to keep track of minimum wage and employee benefits by a city-by-city basis, you're just growing your bureaucracy within your business, and that creates problems. I do also support the idea that if we're going to have these these commerce-related activities, that we need to also, at the state level, give it some serious thought about being able to allow it to be competitive in the state of Minnesota. And I fear that we will have not only the cities wanting to do regulation at 700 plus cities, but what about Commissioner Persky and the 87 counties in the state of Minnesota who also want that same authority to be able to put another layer of bureaucracy in place too?
Heidi.
I do struggle a little bit with some of the reasons for saying why we can't do anything is because it gets caught up in bureaucratic red tape. So let's change it. Let's simplify. Let's have a lean event where we actually simplify the process. Certainly companies like Amazon are able to charge shipping and tax based on where something is being delivered. So I don't see these as being insurmountable. I know that I've brought up in prior forums, I recently did a business study tour in Copenhagen where they're on track to be a carbon neutral capital by 2025. And they do their central heating and cooling by incinerating the waste. Well, by incinerating garbage. Well, their community has done such a great job of reducing their garbage waste that they actually have started to import garbage from other countries, and it has become an economic generator of some sort. So these problems are not insurmountable, and I don't think tough conversation should be a reason for not trying or being aspirational. And to the original question, I don't support preemptive.
All right. There you go. Tama, preemptive legislation. Please.
You know, we've heard in committee some of the reasons for, we've heard trying to ban the plastic bags and also some of the plastic takeout containers as well. Now, some of the reasons why these products were developed were to keep the costs down for the businesses, because they're trying to cut everything they can in order to stay afloat. So it just seems to me that we're kind of taking a step backward, and we're not consulting them and putting them in the loop of figuring out what works and what doesn't. When we were doing minimum wage as well, there really wasn't a lot of comment, at least I didn't feel there was, about the minimum wage and how that would affect certain businesses. Tell me now, who doesn't have a self-checkout? We're seeing that more and more. And that's really sad to me, because businesses are about relationships.
Eric.
Well, the short answer is no. As I suggested in the earlier question, I don't support preemption of any kind. And this is my rationale. It's not as if we operate on a perfect playing field now. That's naive. We have different sales taxes in different municipalities. We have different rules that structure commerce already at different levels of state government, different spaces in state government. There is no sort of perfect equanimity now already. So one, I think it's something, as Heidi suggests, that it absolutely can be managed, all the differences between different areas. But more important to me, and this is extremely important, is that democracy is more important than business. Business should serve democracy, not the other way around. The exact same rationale that we used in our last question about the levy applies in this as well. It's not like it's going to somehow magically all plastic garbage bags are going to be outlawed. That's going to happen through democracy, through a vote. So the exact same thing that we said to operationalize our argument in that last question applies to this one too. So if we're going to be intellectually coherent and committed to democracy, the answer has to be no. If you have a municipality that raises the minimum wage, vote those people out. Same thing is true.
Lisa?
I believe that the state should set the minimum wage to equalize that across our state. Each business and each entity can go ahead and to increase that if they want, but if we have a statewide minimum wage, I think that would make for a better Minnesotan.
So I oppose preemption for one reason, because I want municipalities to be able to innovate just in the same way that states innovate as laboratories of policies. Some of those innovations will be good. Some of them might be foolish. That's how learning by trial and error works. And the second reason is that economically, the cost of living in the Twin Cities is significantly higher than in many other parts of the state. Many people there with living on minimum wage jobs cannot live without subsidized housing. So there also may be different family and workforce needs. A way in which people's living patterns, commuting patterns may prescribe at least trying ways of having family-friendly workplaces that might be different from what would be done out in this part of the state.
All right, Joe?
Well, I'll tell you what, I don't think there's a one-size-fits-all. And I think back to, gosh, how long it was ago that we were looking at the smoking ban. And there were communities that were trying it and other communities that weren't trying it. And that put us into a kind of a difficult situation where you could smoke in one town and not in the other. But then, of course, I think now if there's anybody in the state of Minnesota really would like to go back to where we were. But by the same token, maybe there are things that do merit taking a look at and trying. And I'm willing to allow communities to have that discussion and see if they can perhaps do those innovative things that might actually benefit their community and in the long run maybe benefit the state of Minnesota.
All right. Our next question is going to be about capital investment and the bonding bill, and it's going to go to Tim O'Driscoll. A number of you have talked about infrastructure and the money that goes to cities for wastewater treatment, for instance, through the Public Facilities Authority. So that this might be, if you've got one of those questions or answers ready to go, would be good to tee it up. So typically, the state legislature passes a large capital investment bill during even-numbered years of the legislative biennium. Since the 1990s, the figure of $1 billion has been kind of the top threshold that we've been willing to go to in terms of a bonding bill, and there has not been any discussion about ever really exceeding that. Some folks would like to, but $1 billion has kind of been the ceiling since the 1990s. And so sort of the first question is, should the next legislature consider a higher capital investment bill? And regardless, I guess, of the bill's size, what do you think should be the priorities in the next significant capital investment bill? Tim O'Driscoll.
Thank you. I've always supported the bonding bill or the capital improvement bill. I don't think there's ever been a year, there might have been one, where I didn't vote for it. I think that it provides money for a lot of the needed resources, and I'm very, very supportive of putting money into that program to be able to have matching grant money or monies that can get back to counties, can get back to cities, to be able to help with those. As I mentioned earlier in my comments, it's an alternative way when LGA is not readily available for communities to still be able to have a vehicle in which to be able to provide for funding for the needs that they have. I'll give you another quick example. Many of us, because it's an election year, know that the HAVA, Help America Vote Act, bought brand new equipment for a lot of the communities across the state and across the country. I chief authored the bill that brought money back to the local communities in the state of Minnesota to be able to provide money for locals to be able to replace those voting machines and voting equipment. There are absolutely purposes and for the state to be able to do that. Those are the kinds of things that I would like to continue to put into our capital investment bill in Minnesota.
So over $1 billion, yes or no?
We can look at that because of inflation, and we can look at that, but again, I'm not gonna say let's raise it for the sake of raising it. What I wanna do is I wanna see what are we spending it on, because if we're spending it on things that I don't think are gonna be beneficial for the people of the state of Minnesota who have to pay that, I would like to pare those things out and rededicate those before I raise the ceiling.
All right, Heidi.
I also agree. I don't think we should raise it just to raise it. We should be looking at what we are funding and determine if there is a need to raise it. In terms of priority, I think safety and security comes first when we're looking at the various projects that are up or looking for bonding funding. I do think workforce development projects, whether that be supporting labs and tech and equipment and things like that at the technical and community colleges and universities, is important. I do think that safety, security, workforce development would be my top 3 priorities in looking at budgeting for that.
All right. Tama.
Several years ago, when I was on the bonding committee, along with Tim and Jeff, I did a lot of the tours. And one of the things we looked at was a lot of water projects, whether they were wastewater or we went through recycling plants, you name it, we did it. There were a couple places that had water treatment plants that were like over 100 years old, and you could go down in manholes and look at things. And I'm like, yeah, I'll take a rain check on that. But what we were seeing is they weren't even competitive with the other towns because they were afraid to build a new facility, because what was happening is people were moving across the border into North Dakota. We need to look at those projects, and I think that's what the bonding bill should be. Projects that cities can't handle, but that are very detrimental to how they function as a city. And again, with $1 billion, it's your charge card. I took the Dave Ramsey course. He wants to cut your credit cards up. And so I have a hard time saying it should go too high.
All right, Eric.
The $1 billion is really high. It's a lot of money.
I actually agree with Tama on this. I think too often we talk about bonding as if it's free money, and it's not. We just think it's just magical and it just comes from the sky, and it's not. And I am cheap. I am a cheap man. I know I'm affiliated with the Democrats, so I'm supposed to enjoy burning money, but I'm not, and I don't. I'm a cheap guy. So no, I actually would not go over $1 billion unless there were some extenuating circumstances that would change the conversation. In terms of my priorities for a bonding, a lot of bonding bills have a lot of pork. They're just things that people get to bring back to their home districts just to impress them for some reason. They're not things that have long-term consequences for the state as a whole. And that would be my fundamental priority for bonding. Items of infrastructure that bring people together across the state are more important than things that are significant or convenient for one small area in this way. So when it comes to bonding, my 3 priorities would be things like water quality, like safe and secure schools. We need the money to fix our schools, make our schools safe and secure, and broadband, and also I think our airport could use some help. Those are things that I think are good bonding priorities because they're significant beyond their initial contexts.
All right, Lisa.
When it comes to spending, I am conservative. Before increasing the bonding bill, I would want to take a look at what it has been spent on. Is it still necessary, and what are we actually doing with it? As far as priorities, that workforce development, my husband is a co-owner of a plastics manufacturing company within our district. It's in Paynesville, and they cannot find the people to work there. It can be housing issues, it can be transportation issues. They need skilled tradespeople that are able to be there. So looking at ways that we can increase that workforce, and then broadband would be my top 2 priorities.
Jim.
So there was a legendary U.S. senator who said, $1 billion here, $1 billion there, and pretty soon you're talking real money. So if we're going to be talking real money here, which $1 billion is already, we have to justify it as real needs. And I would say the priority needs for bonding for me would be water infrastructure and broadband, and partly because both of those, if not addressed, will be such an economic drain. And also because both of them are, in a sense, invisible. You don't see the crumbling water infrastructure in many of the small towns. You don't see the lack of broadband until you go door to door as a candidate. Everybody starts telling you about it and how they can't, their kid can't do their homework lessons because they don't have internet access. So if we're talking real money, $1 billion or more, let's have real priorities behind it.
Well, when we talk about the bonding bill, I think a smile's got to come across central Minnesota because we got passed up on corridors for commerce on the Highway 23 extension to 4 lanes. And it was through that bonding bill we were able to get those dollars to actually complete that 4-lane stretch between Wilmer and St. Cloud. Also, as well as here in Way Park, you know, our ability to get that amphitheater, which will be a tremendous asset to the region. And I know Shanna and Rick, we worked down in the legislature to see if we could make that happen. But again, there's got to be a limit. I mean, it's not a blank check. Those dollars come from somewhere. And so we got to make sure that those issues, there's a balance there about the priorities between transportation, the counties, the cities. You know, even nobody mentioned corrections too, because there are some issues that we have in our correctional facilities as well.
You know, the bonding bill is very important, but, you know, you talk about raising it more than $1 billion a year. I think right now, and somebody can correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe that the payments that we're currently making every year is somewhere around $240 million. So if you didn't spend and bond, you'd actually have $240 million more dollars to spend every year. So you got to keep in mind there's a cost to doing business when you keep on bonding like we do. So I support it. We've done some great things. We not only did 23, we funded Highway 14, which has been on the docket for over 40 years to get done. So we've done some great things with the bonding bill. But my efforts, and I think the PFA funding would be the top priority in the next bonding bill.
All right, well, leads me to my next question. You guys are really good at just kind of getting me to my next question.
How do you like that
The
segue?
next one has to do with water quality. Obviously a very important issue near and dear to Minnesotans in every corner of the state. And obviously here you've got a great resource that runs right through central Minnesota in terms of the Mississippi River. Governor Dayton has made this a priority issue during his 8 years in office. And while clean water is a shared value, many have questioned the effectiveness and the appropriateness of some of Governor Dayton's efforts on clean water. What do you think needs to be done? And this you could probably spend an hour talking about, but we'll only give you 45 seconds. What do you think needs to be done to ensure clean water in Minnesota while also making sure that regulations and funding for infrastructure are targeted to the most serious challenges? And I think we're starting with Heidi.
Oh, wow. Okay. That is a big one in 45 seconds. Don't start my time yet. So obviously water is precious to all of us, and I know this doesn't necessarily have anything to do with our drinking water and wastewater, but I know I live on a small lake here in central Minnesota, and we had zebra mussels introduced 2 years ago, and it just completely had an interesting, devastating impact on the lake where everybody cuts their feet open when they walk in. I use that example even though I know it's not drinking water because I do believe regulations are important, much like I think it was Jim who said if we are not taking care of the safety and security of our water sources, we don't see the damage and the challenges until it's too late and it's catastrophic. And so, you know, I like to see changes based on science. I don't like to see knee-jerk reactions in terms of forcing regulations on folks because it is a cost issue. So safety needs to be the top priority, but if we can go least to most to implement and help maintain the systems that we have and focus bonding money or whatever the funding might be to get the water systems that are in the most dilapidated state, we need to prioritize that way.
Tama, water quality.
I think we need to continue looking at the projects that we have been funding in the bonding bill and saying, these are the types of projects we need to help cities with because it is an important investment in all our communities. The buffer bill, oh my goodness. It was to the point where if you said the word buffer, you had to pay $1. I mean, it was just very contentious. A lot of us would say that, and I'm speaking of folks that I deal with, it was just way too much. And talking to some of the folks that work with the DNR said, if we would just be better at implementing what was on the books already, we would be miles ahead. So I think for some of these issues, we need to look what we already do. Do they need to get tweaked, or do we just need to make sure that We just need to enforce what we have.
I went to the governor's celebration of his work with water. I guess it was last year, a year and a half ago, and it was fascinating to see how, in fact, celebratory it was. But there really wasn't a great deal of substance to the conversation. It was just, oh, look at all the wonderful things that we've done. I think when I think about water quality, it's important that it remain local and yet coordinated with other areas, because clearly these small cities in this particular area have a particular relationship to St. Cloud's water and St. Cloud's facilities. So I think it needs to be coordinated and primarily local. When I think of what in St. Augusta, the water runoff tax that was lobbied on you guys, that they hadn't thought about how it was on each individual lot. I'm trying to recall a city council meeting from about 7 or 8 months ago. And it was a tax that was just levied on the area from the state. There needs to be some local input and some local coordination when it comes to updating our antiquated water and sewer systems.
I believe keeping our water quality is priority. We are blessed to be in a state that has many, many water supply areas. So we don't want to regulate ourselves out of the recreational use and the drinking water, but taking a look at what regulations make sense, and then do we need to keep those, do we need to change them, or do we need to reduce them? And I know reducing a regulation usually never happens, but the commercial property that I do the property management for, we were in a position that we needed to do a new well, and we're in a watershed district, and I feel that we were doing the work that we needed to do, but we were regulated to the point of, did this really make sense, or were we paying for a number of people to be standing around watching my project being done on a taxpayer's dollar? So regulations, yes, making sure it makes sense, but then also not out-regulating for our businesses and our recreational use.
So I'm going to leave aside issues like agricultural runoff and zebra mussels, which are important for a different discussion, and focus on municipalities, and in particular the question of how you get city water and sewer out to places where there are lakes, where people are on septics and wells. And there must be some better way of doing that so that you don't run into the sort of anguish conflicts. I was talking with somebody out in Grand Lake who had been on the city council and had played a key role in getting city water and services out to Grand Lake. Now everybody thinks it's great. At the time he did this, people were putting broken toilet bowls in his driveway, treating him as some sort of enemy. We shouldn't have to go through the broken toilet bowl phase in order to get city services out to those lakes and protect our water quality.
Yes, being in Minnesota here, we're blessed by being at the top of the watershed. The water flows up to the Arctic, into Lake Superior, out to St. Lawrence, down the Mississippi, and even a little piece goes into the Missouri River. And so we have nobody really to blame as far as the quality of water coming into Minnesota. That being said, we've done some great things here in Minnesota. If I take a look back when I was a child, the Mississippi River was hideous. The Sauk River was in tough shape. Those things have come back. If we treat nature appropriately, kindly, it will come back. And we want to make sure we continue to promote that. Now, with the buffers, I know there was a lot of controversy over there, but I want to applaud the farmers. We've got 98% compliance in Stearns County. That's because they know the importance of that water. That's the water that they fish in. That's the water that their kids swim in. That's the water that they drink. And I want to applaud the farmers of central Minnesota.
Well, thank you. I tell you what, I'm very proud of my record when it comes to water projects. We completed a project out in Paynesville because they had a bad gas station where the benzene was going towards their new wells, and we got a water treatment plant installed there for Paynesville. We also have Cold Spring. I worked on that for, seems like, my whole legislative career to finally, it seems like, to get an inroad there, to get a water treatment facility there. But the question you have to ask is the regulations. Who's the lead agency down at the state? When you start dealing with water, there's like 15 different agencies you got to talk to. And it's ridiculous. Now, we'll talk about, I could go all day for the buffers deal, but go walk a buffer sometime. I hunt a lot of pheasants. I walk those buffers. Guess what's underneath those buffers? Tile. That water goes right from the field, right into the ditch. That buffer doesn't do a thing.
Tim?
The old adage is you never want to be the first person in your neighborhood to have your septic system fail. Because what happens is the rest of the neighbors, and I lived this firsthand when I was on the city council in Sartell, we had folks who were coming in a subdivision that was adjacent to the city, and it was in the township. And they had failing wells, they had failing septic systems, and one neighbor went out and just about got run out of the neighborhood by saying, maybe we should petition the city for improvements. None of the neighbors wanted to do it, made the investment in a new well and septic system. A few years later, you were onto something. They had to pay twice because they were the first one with the failed system. That can be escalated to cities as well. Some of the smaller communities that are having failing infrastructure, more money into PFA will allow them to be able to upgrade and improve those facilities so that we can manage it at the source where those phosphates and other kinds of toxins would find their way into waterways and into our rivers and streams.
All right. We're going to take a couple of minutes maybe here and take some questions from the audience. And we haven't scripted this out as well, but maybe what I would ask is if someone does have a question, raise your hand, I'll recognize you. And if our panelists would still continue to adhere to our 45-second rule, that'd probably be helpful. And if folks don't have questions, I'm more than happy to think of some more. So I'll throw it open to our gang here. Questions? Yes, sir.
Well, I have a question. I'm going to go back to local government aid. We heard about Wayne Park doesn't get any, well, cities in Augusta, they're very small.
Can we get them to come to the mic?
Sure, come on up.
Because they're gonna be on TV and everybody will hear you then.
Local government aid is an issue for our city. Back in the year 2000, when we became a city, we got approximately $200,000 a year in local government aid. That ended up getting cut back to $20,000. Now we're back up to about $70,000. So somehow, when they decided to make some changes to local government aid, changing the formula, there were some cities that really got hit hard, like the city of St. Augusta. And like say, Wake Park gets nothing, City of Lakeville gets nothing. There has to be something in there for cities where you get X amount of money for each person, but then take different formulas added to it for what their other needs are and stuff. So just to get everybody that's paying in should be able to get something out of it.
All right, Tama, if you want to start, or if you have a response, then we'll move down along the way here. What do you do about those cities that maybe don't feel like they're getting what they should be?
Which ones think they are getting what they deserve?
Yeah.
Well, that's a good question.
Several times, more than several times, I've talked to the folks that know the most about LGA, and it's one of the things that there just isn't an appetite to mess with the formula. I mean, I really don't get a good answer about what we can do. I'll bring up, well, can't we redo the formula, or can we add exceptions, or can we do things like that? And the response is, well, no, we're not going to do that. We just did it not too long ago, and it was a couple of years ago, wasn't it?
2013 was the last major.
When was it?
2013 was the last major.
Okay, yeah, it just really seems like there's no willingness to look at some of these exceptions, and that really makes me sad. I don't think we serve people well when we can't look at, if it's not working for somebody, then I think we need to tweak it so that it does work. And I'll continue to go in their office and say, yeah, it's still not working.
Eric, thoughts?
Mike, that was more of a statement and question, but I agree with you wholeheartedly for a number of reasons. When it comes to taxation, just across the board, one of our biggest concerns as citizens is that it be fair. And I think a lot of us feel that perhaps LGA is not administered in a way that is fair. For me, that's a priority. Fairness is a priority. And I think we need people in the State House who will fight for fairness in that way. I can't tell you how I would personally fix the formula, because I don't know. But I do know that we need strong advocacy to stand up to questions of fairness, especially when it comes to taxation. And this is a great example of that.
Lisa?
From what you stated, I realize there's a need for the change in the funding formula. To me, I would look at the cities that, like you said, that there was money coming earlier and then it's gone away. My question would be why? What could we do to change it, and then how could we equalize that across the state? Maybe not the same amount, but the same fairness given to each community.
Jim?
So early in my time as a candidate, I attended a Avon City Council meeting, and this issue came up. Why does Avon get so much significantly less LGA than Albany when there seemed to be no reason for it? And it seemed to be because some of the houses in Avon were in better shape than some of the houses in Albany. So I guess the remedy that if enough of us neglect our houses will improve the financial situation of our town. So that seems to be the kind of a mystery as to why some cities seem to be getting so much more than others that have comparable situations. Yes, I don't understand the formula, and the people who are describing this said nobody understands the formula. I guess if I'm elected, I will do my best to understand this mysterious LGA formula and try to straighten it out.
Joe?
Yes, I can understand the frustration of many cities. You know, if we got a pie sitting on the table and there's cut in different sizes of pieces, and some people are getting the big piece of the pumpkin pie and some people are getting the sliver, they feel shorted. And by all means, they feel they're not getting their fair share. Maybe when more dollars come into that, maybe those smaller pieces could maybe pick up a little bit of meat, maybe be a little bit larger. But those cities also fluctuating with the formula. In Sartell, we had times where we were getting nearly nothing, then sometimes $200,000 and $600,000. It's very difficult for them to actually do real planning for their city budget because they can't depend on where the formula is going or what's going to be applied. So, yeah, it would be nice to bring some stability, and then also for those that aren't getting that big piece of pie, give them a little bit more.
Jeff?
Well, I truly like to compare, equate the LGA formula. The people that figured that one out, I think, figured out education formula too. I think that they both need a massive overhaul, and we probably need to have some people sit down. And if you're going to do this, let's have a little task force together and figure out exactly how this thing needs to be put together. Because I think that both education funding and the LGA formula, I don't think there's very many people that fully understand how the system works or is supposed to work.
Tim?
The only other issue that's more controversial when you start talking to cities than LGA, annexation. And the reason I make that comparison is I would be willing to bet that the 6 cities who are here tonight at the area cities meeting all have a different opinion about what LGA should look like. So as a legislator, you've got 134 people in the House and 67 people in the Senate who are representing all different parts of the state. Our definition of fair here is completely different than it is in the metro, where communities have larger incomes and they get no LGA. Their question to me is, why should I continue to put money in your cities for my taxpayers? It is a multi-facet. Everybody looks at it from their own perspective, as will everybody in here as well. It's a tough nut to crack.
Heidi?
I work for the state of Minnesota as a university employee, and one of the ongoing jokes is if it were easy, it would be done already because the processes are so complicated. But my philosophy is if it's broke, fix it. And so, yes, you have to pull together all the different cities and the counties and find out what works, what doesn't work, and come up with a new formula. Don't just tweak it, come up with a new one. And grab a couple 12 packs of Red Bull, lock yourself in a conference room, and come out when you've reached that consensus, because it has to be done.
Do you get a bathroom too? Because
We need an ensuite.
that would get it done quickly.
All right. Other questions? Yeah, come on up.
Good evening. You know, I'm a teacher, a tech ed teacher and so forth, and I hear from a lot of business owners in regards to the construction and transportation and so forth, that they have a hard time finding trained workforce. And, you know, it's been ongoing for some time. I'm wondering if you could comment as to solutions possibly to supply more workers for the companies that need these trained workers. Because in this day and time, many students are saddled with debt in post-secondary education. And I think it's a problem that complicates their ability to get that post-secondary training. So if you could each maybe just comment how you could enhance the workforce development. Thank you.
We'll start with Eric.
Sure. This is an incredibly important concern. As many of you who are business owners or who are in particular industries know, it's incredibly difficult to find workers these days. But we don't just want workers for their own sake, we want skilled workers. And that's an important part of this conversation that too often gets left behind. We think about the need to increase vocational education in public schools, which I think is a fantastic idea, to fund that more heavily, but not at the expense of education as a whole. I think that there are a lot of folks who, if they went into the career that they were thinking about when they were 14, we'd all be cowboys or ballerinas. You know, so we can't give up on general education as we encourage people to find their ways to careers, especially because what happens to you now if you went to high school and you decided you wanted to work in refrigerator manufacturing, or you worked at Electrolux for 25 years, now what do you do? We need to balance career vocational education with entrepreneurship, with understanding how to create not just a job, and not just to do a job, but to create jobs. So for me, I absolutely believe in the greater investment in career vocational training in schools connected to the junior colleges and unions and post-secondary education opportunities, but not at the expense of some of the more general imperatives that we have in education to grow not just laborers, but American citizens.
All right, Lisa, workforce development.
Thank you for the question. This hits our family. First of all, like I mentioned earlier, my husband being an owner of a manufacturing company, I had alluded to the fact that they can't find those skilled people to come in and work. I think when we have students and willing workers that are looking to maybe be retrained, that's an opportunity that we can have to get some of those skills into the people. What I would like to potentially see is if there's a way to provide some type of grant or tax break or something to our local businesses along with our students to maybe forgive a little bit of the debt. If there could be a partnership in that way. I don't know the details of that. It's just kind of a thought that's been there. The other thing is making sure that we have a rich business community and manufacturing community in District 13, and to make sure that we're letting our high schools know and we can partner with those businesses so our students don't have to leave our areas, but they can know the rich heritage that we have right here that they could be a part of. Could we be training those students? Are we doing tours? Are we providing some education opportunities and workforce cooperations that might increase it in this area?
Jim.
Yes, this is very important. I think we can think about doing this in two different ways. One is investing in education, in industrial tech, in the high schools, and in something like St. Cloud Technical College. And the other side of it would be with industries and companies. The challenge with industries and companies, though, is if that company invests enough in those work skills, that worker may go somewhere else. So the company is losing part of its investment. That's why we have schools in the first place, because it serves this purpose. It serves this function for all employers, and it also can be done in ways that teach people to be citizens as well as workers in the way that Eric has described.
You know, I do think we have to take a look at what we're doing in college, vocational schools, and in the trades, because as I was knocking at the doors, I talked to many folks that we're very short, many workers in many areas. We're short of carpenters. We're short of people in electricians. We're short of people doing drywall, painting, ventilation. In fact, I was out to Opola at Polar. They're short 15 welders right now. And many of these are very good paying jobs. We just don't have the students, we just don't have the people going into these jobs. And there's a great opportunity and a great demand. On the area of financing student loans, one thing I just find so phenomenally frustrating is if any of us go to the bank, we get 0.5%, not even 1% for our money, but yet we've got students that are paying 6, 7, and one student I talked was paying 8% for a student loan. How can we be ripping these kids off? It's just not right that they should be paying that kind of interest on a student loan. Jeff?
Well, 2 years ago, I talked to a manufacturer in our district, and what he had done is they went out and they were having trouble getting a certain skilled workforce. So what they did is they went and actually grabbed students in high school and agreed to pay for them to go to tech college. And actually, when they got done with tech college, of course, they had to work also with them, but they paid for all their training. And then it went so well that they actually allowed them to go to a 4-year college to complete their degree in engineering, so they could, and then they had to sign an agreement that they were going to work so long that to get that training. And I said, you know what, that's a model. I want to take that to the legislature, and I want to drive that home and make that available to everybody. He said, don't you dare. He said, you'll screw this up. We don't want any more competition for these students than what we already have. So it's out there. We can do this, and we should do more with cooperation with high schools and tech colleges to have that work out there.
One of the things we need to do is we need to work with our high schools and our guidance counselors. One of the things that students have been pushed to is you've got to have a 4-year degree, you've got to have a 4-year degree. And society does a job of stigmatizing people who don't want to go into a 4-year career. I can tell you that on the weekend of the 4th of July, when my water heater gave way and flooded my entire basement, my most favorite person was the plumber who came out to replace my water heater. That was my hero, still is today, for doing that. And communities across the state that I have found that have been successful on this, Dave, have actually rolled up the sleeves in the community. And we've got a great opportunity in the Greater St. Cloud Area Economic Development Partnership, led by Patty Gartland, the former city administrator from Sartell, to be able to work with the schools, work with the employers, and put some innovative ideas together. I can tell you that up in northern Minnesota, a friend of mine is a superintendent up there. They've got together with businesses and school, and they're actually training students in high school to be able to get the skills to be able to work in the businesses in the community. They said, we can't wait forever. We got to own this problem locally and do something about it.
So these fabulous partnerships are already happening now. That's great. Let's keep them going. I want to bring up another issue. We simply don't have enough people here. So if we have the best education system, access to health care for everyone through single payer, we will attract people to the state of Minnesota. We have an amazing immigrant population here that is dedicated, hardworking, wants to learn, wants to contribute to this society, and we have wonderful role models in this community, Horizon Roofing, Centricare, District 742, several others who were on a community panel a few weeks ago talking about how they worked to integrate our immigrant population into their workforce by teaching them English for the workplace, English for citizenship, and welcoming our new members to this community so that we can all succeed and thrive.
I know I don't have enough time to say all this. One of the things that we saw in education finance was that there were a lot of partnerships with schools and getting some loan forgiveness and trying everything and anything we can to get folks into the jobs to go. I was really pleased this morning when I was stopped at the light right by the library watching the Tech High School students building. That's great. I love that it's right next to the road because we need to get young folks at least a taste of what is possible. And companies are starting their own programs. One program that I really enjoyed hearing about when we were in committee was there is a program, welding program that one of the schools was doing off hours. So they were doing it at night and weekends. And the kids were doing so great with the welding program that a couple of the adults says, hey, I can do that, can I come as well? And I think we're missing that group of folks. They did expand it to include parents, and they have just had a wonderful turnout and getting people trained in the jobs that they needed.
All right, we are coming to the end of our time. We did promise you 1 minute each to make your sort of closing pitch. Before we do that, I do want to thank you for giving of your time this evening. You've answered a lot of questions on a broad set of topics. As you are going about your work, use these guys as a resource. They are the expert on these issues. Talk to them about what they need. They'll be more than happy, trust me, to share their insights and opinions. And so thank you again for your time and for your offer of your service to your community as well. And so with that, for our 1 minute closing statements, we'll start with Lisa.
Perfect.
Thank you for coming tonight. I know taking the time out of schedules is a little difficult, but I have learned much already this evening because of the questions that were asked. Some things I was familiar with, some a little bit less. I think my experience on the Rocori School Board, being able to listen to my community, is just a drop in the bucket, a start for what I'd like to do as your representative in the House of Representatives. And so I would value, if elected to that position, the opportunity to partner with each one of our townships, cities, school districts, and business communities so that I could learn more and be that representative. My door would always be open. I may not have all of the answers. There's a lot to learn, but I do value this. I think Central Minnesota is the most amazing place to be. I had lived out of state for a little while, and as an adult, I came back by choice. Thanks again for being here and for the great questions.
Thank you for being here. To go back to what I said at the beginning, we live in a very polarized time where there are just endless party ideological battles, and cities, municipalities get caught up in the crossfire. But in a certain way, you also, I believe, are part of the remedy in that people who work in city governments can't afford to be as partisan, can't afford to be as ideologically driven as maybe people in the legislature or in Congress. In my conversations with mayors, city council members, they've almost always been very good conversations. That person may have different party views than I on many other things, but talking about how to improve water quality, how to get the roads built, those kinds of things can help us get beyond these ideological battles. So I like to take what I see in cities and municipalities as something of a model, not exactly the same, but something of a model of how we should be working in the legislature, and that's how I will try to work if elected. I ask for your vote.
I want to say thank you for having the forum tonight, but more importantly, get your other council members out here. Working together and sharing these things are just great things that we can do as collective cities. But if there's one thing I want you to take away, I want you to take away that my whole life here has been about people, whether it's been being an Eagle Scout, being a member of my church, being a coach, being a teacher, being a council member, being the mayor or the commissioner. It's always been about people. But this election really isn't about me. It's about you. It's about each and every one of you, and it's about your kids, it's your grandkids. It's about the child that hasn't been born yet. It's about the elderly. It's about the people with special needs, and it's about treating people fairly. It's about jobs, education, and healthcare. And we can only build a better Minnesota if we come together. The partisan politics have got to stop. Democrats and Republicans, we can build a better Minnesota, but let's work together. As I mentioned earlier, I said the Constitution says we the people, not we the party. And let's see if we can do that, if we can truly, honestly focus on the people instead of the parties. And also, again, I'm going to continue a positive campaign. I'm not running against Jeff. I'm running for each and every one of you.
Well, thank you. Thanks for being here. I tell you what, life is about relationships. And I've built relationships in most of these cities. I built the relationships across party lines at the legislature during my last 6 years. And I've built, people don't realize there's a big divide between the Senate and the House. We like to kid each other, but you got to build relationships with the other chamber. And that's what I've done in the last 6 years. I've carried bills that were carried by a Democrat senator on the other side. We've got things done because we trusted one another. There's not enough trust and faith in the world, and you got to build those relationships to get things done. And I believe I've built the relationships here in this district and in the legislature to get those things done that we need done in our central Minnesota. Thank you.
One of the things that I've been known for all of my life is to be able to bring opposing sides together and find a solution to that. And I would like to just take a minute to tell you a little bit about some of the successes that I've had in the Minnesota legislature. This past year in 2018, we passed the largest pension reform bill in the state of Minnesota to take care of a number of our retired workers who dedicate themselves to public service. I was able to get all the Democrats and the Republicans in the House to vote for that, and Senator Rosen was able to get all of the Republicans and Democrats in the House to be able to vote for, or excuse me, in the Senate to vote for that. Took us 3 years to get it done. We got it done. This year I was notified that I had the largest number of bills that were signed by Governor Dayton this last session out of all the members in the Minnesota House. It's the third time I've enjoyed either being number one or number two since the Republicans have been back in the majority in the last 4 years. I can get things done. I am getting things done. This guy spends an awful lot of time on my office talking about issues that are extremely important, such as, and maybe you talked about before I got here, but the issues of regulation and what are we doing with water regulations that are killing cities and costing more to be able to put those infrastructures in. Thank you for the opportunity tonight.
Minnesota has a long history of big, bold moves to make it the best state of the union. We were the first state to implement minimum wage back in the early 1900s. We took on big tobacco and said, you know what, your business practices are killing our state and you're going to pay for that. We need more leadership to do those big, bold actions for Minnesota now. The things that are facing us in terms of a crisis are health insurance and people's access to care, education funding, and infrastructure spending. What you heard a lot of up here is we all agree on what the issues are. What we don't agree on necessarily is how you solve those issues. I am known for big, bold actions and working with others to get things done. I'm running for 13B. I ask for your vote. Thanks for being here.
Thank you all for being here. Quite frankly, I'm wondering what it'll be like next year, not seeing Way Park running through the halls all the time. Are you? Good, I'll be comforted. It's, a lot of times, it's not always big glamorous things that we are asked to carry. We're asked to carry the things that matter most to our communities and the people that we represent. I have been so honored to be able to do that, but also working with constituent care. That is a huge opportunity for all of us. When somebody has an issue, we try to help them, direct them to an area. I'm working with somebody right now who hasn't gotten their driver's license in 8 months. I'm not really sure what's up with that, but we're trying to find the answers. Or somebody that isn't getting the health care that they need. They've been rejected for some reason or other. These are the types of things that we face every day, and we don't know about them unless you let us know. So having you come down, and my door is always open. I don't think I've ever refused to see anybody, unless there was a time I was in committee and couldn't get out. But I really enjoy that part of it. I enjoy working with folks. I enjoy finding the solutions, and I look forward to doing that again next year.
Thanks again, everyone, for coming out. You know, over the past year, I've gone to probably 3 or 4 Waite Park City Council meetings, and I think about 7 or 8 St. Augusta City Council meetings. And I didn't go to those events as a politician. I went as a neighbor, as a community member. I never said a word at any of those meetings because I didn't want to draw attention to myself. I just wanted to be there and to learn. I'm not a fool. St. Augusta's not going to vote for me in whole. You know, I'm not a fool. I was there to learn. And I was there because I show up. I go to city council meetings now. I'll go to city council meetings when I'm in office because that's what we need in the legislature now. People who show up. We know that there's a good chance that the way District 14's group of legislators is probably going to change pretty significantly next year. And because of that, we need real, bold leadership. Small cities are just like St. Cloud in a lot of ways. Stuck in the middle, stuck in this space. The greater central Minnesota area is stuck in this space of not being the cities and not being rural. That's why we need strong leadership in St. Paul to stand up for the things we need, not to wait to hear what we need to do, but to go out and find out what needs to be done and have the strength to stand up and do it. I hope for your support, and thanks again for coming out.
All right. Mayor Schultz, last word.
Lester, okay. Really, who was your favorite mayor? Okay. No, I want to thank you all for coming out tonight. We want to give special thanks to Judy. She gave she prepared the meal prior to the forum. Shauna, thank you for keeping time. Thank you, Bradley, for showing up and moderating this. And thank you, Candace, for putting yourself out there. We know, or from our own personal experience of running in public service, it takes a lot to put yourself out there. Thank you all, and there is no business for the intergovernmental, so we're dismissed.